When Karen knocked on my door with a $5,000 fine for illegal hunting, I just smiled. What she didn't know was that little piece of paper was about to set off a chain of events that would leave the entire HOA board in tears and their precious hiking trails permanently locked away. They thought they controlled every inch of this neighborhood, every blade of grass, every mailbox color. But there's one thing they forgot about: actual property law. And once I started digging into those so-called community trails they strutted down every morning like they owned the place, I uncovered a secret so devastating it would flip their whole power game upside down. If you've ever dreamed of teaching an overpowering HOA a lesson they'll never forget, this story is absolutely for you. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one, because what happens next is pure justice served ice cold. I never planned on becoming the neighborhood villain. 2 years ago, when I moved to Green Valley Estates, I was simply looking for peace and quiet after 8 grueling years in the military and another 5 working in cramped tech offices in Seattle. I craved space, lots of it. My name's Mason Holloway. I'm 38 years old, and I work remotely as a software engineer for a cybersecurity firm. The job pays well, gives me the flexibility I need, and most importantly, it allowed me to escape the city chaos for this quiet suburb nestled against beautiful woodland in western Washington. Green Valley Estates seemed absolutely perfect on paper. Modern homes on spacious lots, backed by miles of pristine forest, just remote enough to feel peaceful without being completely isolated. The HOA fees were pretty steep, at $450 quarterly, but the listing agent assured me it was worth every penny for the immaculate, maintained community spaces and a landscaping that made property values soar year after year. What she conveniently failed to mention was that Green Valley Estates Association was run by Evelyn Richardson, quite possibly the most controlling woman to ever wield a rulebook like a weapon. I first met Evelyn during my second week in the neighborhood when she appeared at my door carrying a welcome basket that contained more HOA bylaws than actual welcome gifts. The woman had perfectly styled blonde hair, designer casual wear, and a smile that definitely didn't reach her eyes. "We're absolutely delighted to have fresh blood in Green Valley," she said with that practiced politician's grin. "I'm sure you'll just love our tight-knit community once you understand exactly how we operate around here." That should have been my first major red flag, right there. Evelyn was a senior manager at some prestigious law firm downtown and had been the HOA president for 5 years, running all unopposed elections, I would later discover, because absolutely nobody dared to challenge her iron grip on power. The first few months, I kept my head down and stayed out of trouble. I paid my dues right on time, maintained my lawn according to their ridiculous regulations, and avoided those monthly HOA meetings that, from what I gathered from my neighbor Sarah, were more like Evelyn's personal courtroom sessions than actual community discussions. Sarah Johnson was one of the few genuinely friendly faces in the entire neighborhood, a 35-year-old elementary school teacher who lived 2 doors down and occasionally brought over homemade chocolate chip cookies just to be neighborly. "Don't let Evelyn get under your skin," she advised me early on with a knowing look. "She means well most of the time, but she honestly believes her way is the only way that makes sense. Just fly under her radar, and you'll be fine." I might have continued flying under Evelyn's radar indefinitely if it weren't for my weekend hobby that connected me to my roots. Growing up in rural Montana, I'd been taught to hunt by my grandfather since I was old enough to safely hold a rifle. It wasn't just recreation for our family, it was tradition, a sacred connection to a simpler way of life that city folks just don't understand. And honestly, I genuinely enjoyed the quiet focus and patience it required. The way it cleared my mind completely. One crisp weekend in October, I discovered a large tract of wooded land adjoining our community, about 80 acres of absolutely pristine forest with a crystal-clear stream running right through the middle of it. I spent an entire Saturday exploring every inch of it, and it looked absolutely perfect for deer hunting season, which was rapidly approaching. Curious about who actually owned this beautiful piece of land, I did some thorough research down at the county records office. The land belonged to an 80-3-year-old gentleman named Frank Williams who had moved down to Florida several years ago but still maintained legal ownership. I managed to track down his contact information and sent him a respectful email explaining that I was interested in hunting on his property, with his permission, and would treat the land with complete respect. To my genuine surprise, he replied the very next day with enthusiasm I hadn't expected. "Son, I've owned that beautiful land for over 50 years, he wrote back. "My family used to farm some of the clearings back in the day. Haven't been back there in almost a decade since my arthritis got really bad and travel became difficult. If you want to hunt there, you absolutely have my permission. Just be respectful of the wildlife and the land itself, and send me a picture if you manage to get a nice buck." What I didn't realize at the time, and what would become absolutely crucial later, was that for years, Evelyn and several other HOA members had been using Frank's private land for their pretentious morning hiking routine. They'd created unofficial trails without permission, placed cute little benches at scenic spots for their Instagram photos, and even installed bird feeders to attract wildlife. They had essentially claimed this man's land as their own private nature reserve, despite having absolutely zero legal right to set foot on it. This detail would become extremely important very soon. On a crisp November morning, I headed out before dawn with my rifle and hunting gear. Feeling that familiar excitement, I positioned myself in a clearing that Frank had specifically mentioned was a good spot, waiting patiently as the sun slowly rose and painted the forest in beautiful golden light. Around 9 in the morning, luck was definitely with me. A healthy 8-point buck appeared at the edge of the clearing, and I took the shot cleanly. The deer went down instantly, a clean, ethical kill that my grandfather would have been proud of. As I approached to field dress the animal properly, I heard voices echoing through the trees, getting closer. Through the forest emerged Evelyn, leading a small group of 5 women, dressed in expensive athletic wear, all carrying fancy water bottles and chatting loudly about neighborhood gossip like they owned the place. The absolute moment Evelyn spotted me kneeling beside the deer, her face transformed with complete horror and outrage. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" she shrieked, frantically fumbling for her phone. "This is a protected nature area. Who gave you permission to murder innocent animals here?" Before I could even begin to explain the situation, she was snapping photos from every angle and threatening to call the authorities immediately. "This is absolutely barbaric and disgusting," she announced dramatically to her wide-eyed companions, "and it's completely against Green Valley's commitment to environmental stewardship and community values." I tried my best to explain calmly that I had the actual owner's written permission, but she cut me off with a dismissive wave of her manicured hand. "We manage these beautiful nature trails," she insisted with absolute authority, "and hunting is strictly prohibited under any circumstances." But what happened over the next few days made me realize that the HOA didn't just want to control the color of my mailbox or the height of my grass. They wanted to control my entire life, and they were willing to break the law to do it. 3 days after my encounter with Evelyn and her hiking group in the woods, I discovered an official-looking envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal notice of violation from the Green Valley Estates Association, citing me for cruel hunting activities causing significant community disturbance and demanding an outrageous fine of $5,000, to be paid within 30 days or face legal consequences. My first reaction was complete disbelief, followed quickly by righteous anger. I knew enough about HOA regulations and property law to understand they had absolutely no jurisdiction over activities conducted outside HOA property boundaries, especially on private land where I had explicit written permission from the actual owner. This was a clear case of overreach, and they knew it. I immediately called Sarah, who sighed heavily when I told her about the ridiculous fine. "That definitely sounds like Evelyn," she said with frustration in her voice. "She's been talking about this incident at the school where I teach, making you sound like some kind of dangerous serial killer. Several parents are genuinely worried there's a threatening element in the neighborhood now." Sarah lowered her voice even though we were talking on the phone. "Listen, Mason, Evelyn's been leading her Green Valley wellness walks through those woods for years. She actually uses it as a major selling point when new families move into the neighborhood, exclusive access to private nature trails and all that. I honestly don't think she's ever bothered to check who actually owns the land legally." The next HOA meeting was scheduled for the following evening, and I decided to attend and challenge this bogus fine. When I arrived at the community center, the small meeting room was unusually packed with residents. Evelyn sat like a queen at the head of the conference table, flanked by Marcus Bennett, the 42-year-old vice president who worked for the local government and functioned primarily as Evelyn's loyal yes. Richard Cooper, the 55-year-old HOA treasurer, sat to her right, looking visibly uncomfortable with the whole situation. I recognized several other neighbors in the crowd, including Jessica Parker, a 40-year-old woman who had built quite a reputation for reporting even the most minor HOA violations with absolutely zealous enthusiasm. "Ah, Mr. Holloway has finally decided to join us," Evelyn announced with fake sweetness as I took a seat near the back. "Perhaps you'd like to explain to our concerned community why you feel it's appropriate to engage in violent activities in our treasured neighborhood nature preserve." The way she deliberately framed the question made it crystal clear. This was designed to be a public shaming session, not an actual discussion about facts or rules. I stood up calmly, holding a folder of documentation I'd carefully prepared. "I'd be more than happy to clarify the actual facts," I said in an even voice. "First, I was hunting completely legally with a valid state permit on private property, with the owner's explicit written permission. Second, the land in question is definitely not HOA property, nor is it a neighborhood nature preserve of any kind. It's privately owned by a gentleman named Frank Williams who lives in Florida." I placed copies of my hunting license and Frank's email giving me permission on the table for everyone to see. Furthermore, this HOA has absolutely no legal jurisdiction to issue fines for activities conducted outside HOA boundaries. I've reviewed our community bylaws thoroughly, and there's nothing that gives the association this kind of authority over private property. The room grew uncomfortably quiet as people processed this information. Richard Cooper picked up the documents with a frown, studying them carefully. He seems to have a valid point about jurisdiction. Evelyn, he said cautiously, if this incident occurred outside our property lines, then legally ... double quotes. Evelyn cut him off sharply before he could finish. That's where you're completely mistaken, Mason. Those trails have been an integral part of our community resources for over a decade. We've maintained them, improved them with our own time and money, and our residents have enjoyed them as part of their Green Valley experience. Whether some absentee owner happens to be listed on a dusty deed somewhere is completely irrelevant after so many years of established community. Marcus nodded vigorously in agreement, adding his support. Plus, the presence of firearms so close to our homes represents a serious safety concern for all residents, especially families with young children who play in their backyards. The debate grew increasingly heated, with several residents voicing concerns about safety and property values, clearly repeating talking points they'd heard from Evelyn before this meeting even started. Jessica Parker stood up dramatically and declared, I moved to Green Valley because it was peaceful and safe for my family. Now I'm genuinely afraid to let my children play in our own yard. Knowing there are armed men prowling around the woods behind our homes, I tried repeatedly to interject that hunting season was strictly limited, and that I always followed rigid safety protocols. But the narrative had already been firmly established in their minds. Eventually, Evelyn called Officer Mike Davis, a 45-year-old local police officer who happened to live right here in our community. When he arrived and reviewed the situation objectively, he confirmed that I had been acting completely within the law. As far as hunting regulations go, he's in full compliance with all state and local laws, Officer Davis explained professionally. And if he has written permission from the legal landowner, there's absolutely no trespassing issue here. This would be strictly a civil matter between the HOA and the property owner, not a criminal matter. This should have completely ended the discussion right there. But Evelyn was absolutely undeterred by little things like facts and laws. This isn't really about legality, Mike, she insisted with that condescending tone. It's about community standards and the safety of our residents. The HOA board has the clear authority to enforce those standards, and this fine stands as issued. As the meeting finally concluded, Evelyn fixed me with her coldest stare. You have exactly 30 days to pay this fine. Mr. Holloway, if you continue to refuse cooperation, we'll be forced to place a lien on your property and pursue aggressive legal action against you. I stood my ground without flinching. I absolutely will not be paying a fine that has zero legal basis, I replied firmly, and I strongly suggest this board consult with an actual real estate attorney before making any more threats about liens or legal action. On my way out, I noticed a glossy brochure on the information table titled Green Valley Nature Trails Map. I picked it up and was absolutely shocked to see Frank's entire 80-acre property clearly marked as Green Valley Nature Trails with detailed trail maps and scenic points marked, but with absolutely no mention anywhere that this was actually private land owned by someone else. That night, I called Frank Williams again to update him on this bizarre situation. He sounded tired and genuinely frustrated when I explained what had been happening. I had absolutely no idea they were using my land like that, he said with obvious anger. I've never given anyone permission to build trails or install benches or anything else. The property taxes keep going up every year, and I've actually been thinking seriously about selling the land anyway. My medical bills are really piling up, and I could definitely use the cash. A brilliant idea began forming in my mind as we talked. Frank, I asked casually, if you're genuinely serious about selling, I might be interested in purchasing the property myself. What kind of price would you consider fair? As we discussed the financial details, I realized I might have found the absolutely perfect way to turn the tables on Evelyn and her power-hungry HOA board. That night, as I researched property ownership laws and adverse possession requirements, I discovered something that made me actually gasp out loud. The HOA wasn't just illegally using Frank's land without permission. They were actively planning to transform it into the Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, without any legal consent whatsoever from the actual owner. Discovery of these secret park plans changed absolutely everything. While digging through public records and permit applications, I found detailed documents filed by the HOA for preliminary development of a community nature park on Frank's land. They had submitted comprehensive environmental surveys, applied for multiple government grants, and even organized several fundraising events, all for a major project on land they had no legal right to touch. Attached to these applications were professional architects' renderings showing elaborate walking paths, picnic areas with gazebos, and right at the main entrance, a large stone sign declaring Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, a Green Valley legacy. The sheer audacity was absolutely breathtaking. These people were planning to name a park after themselves, using someone else's private property. The next morning, I contacted Amanda Lewis, a sharp 40-year-old real estate attorney who had been highly recommended by a colleague. She carefully reviewed all the documents I had collected and raised her eyebrows in amazement. "This is highly unusual," she said with professional understatement. "The HOA has essentially attempted to claim adverse possession of this land, but they clearly haven't met the strict legal requirements. In Washington state, they would need to have used the land openly and notoriously without the owner's permission for at least 10 consecutive years, and they would need to have been paying all the property taxes, which obviously Mr. Williams has been handling," she continued. "Furthermore, their documented plans to develop and commercialize the property go well beyond casual recreational use. This represents a clear and significant overreach of authority." When I told her I was seriously considering purchasing the land myself, she smiled approvingly. "That would certainly be a very interesting solution to this problem. Let me help you make sure everything is handled completely above board and legally sound." Over the next several days, a strange intimidation campaign began in the neighborhood targeting me specifically. My garbage cans would mysteriously remain at the curb long after collection day. Anonymous threatening notes appeared on my car windshield, warning me that animal killers aren't welcome in Green Valley. Several neighbors who had previously been friendly suddenly became cold and distant, clearly influenced by Evelyn's whisper campaign. Sarah told me she'd overheard Evelyn, at a school function, actively warning parents to keep their children away from that dangerous man on Maple Street who kills innocent animals for fun. Message was crystal clear: conform to their demands or be completely ostracized from the community. While this social pressure campaign was unfolding around me, I was quietly working with Frank Williams and Amanda Lewis to negotiate the purchase of those crucial 80 acres. Frank initially asked for $800,000, but given his eagerness to sell and the property's relatively remote location, we eventually settled on $750,000. It was definitely a steep price that would require nearly my entire life savings, plus a significant chunk of an inheritance from my grandparents. But I considered it a solid investment in both valuable real estate and my own peace of mind. Amanda expedited all the legal paperwork, and we scheduled the official closing for the following week. During this time, I continued receiving increasingly aggressive notices from the HOA. Citation for improper garbage can storage. Another for unauthorized vehicle parking. My own truck parked in my own driveway because I'd left it there for more than 24 hours while away on a business trip, and a third reminder about the original hunting violation fine. Now, with substantial added late fees, bringing the total to nearly $6,000. I carefully filed each ridiculous notice away, following Amanda's professional advice to document everything thoroughly, but not engage directly until we'd completed the land purchase. Sarah continued to be my eyes and ears in the community, reporting back on the increasingly frantic activity. Evelyn's been holding private meetings with certain homeowners. She told me one evening, they're planning some kind of big announcement about a major new community project. There's supposedly an exclusive fundraising event next month, with a minimum donation of $1,000 per family. She glanced around nervously before continuing. She's been particularly cozy with Daniel Thompson from the city council lately. I think she's working on securing permits or official approvals for something big. Daniel Thompson was a local politician known for supporting development projects that benefited his political contributors, and his connection to Evelyn raised serious concerns about what they were planning. I also noticed Trevor Adams, Evelyn's 39-year-old husband who worked as an architectural consultant, surveying the disputed property with professional measuring equipment. When he spotted me watching from the edge of the woods, he quickly packed up his gear and left without any acknowledgement. His company, Green Vision Consulting, was listed on all the park development applications as the primary design firm for the entire project. Everything pointed to a carefully orchestrated plan to essentially steal Frank's land for the HOA's purposes, and specifically for Evelyn's ego-driven vanity project. By the end of that week, I received yet another visit from Evelyn and Marcus, this time bringing a formal legal notice of intent to sue if I didn't pay the accumulated fines, which now totaled $5,700 with additional late fees and penalties. "This is your absolute final warning, Mason," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with artificial concern. "We really don't want to pursue legal action against you, but our community's standards must be upheld at all costs." Marcus stood behind her with his arms crossed, trying to look intimidating but mainly succeeding at looking deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Board has unanimously approved pursuing aggressive legal remedies if you continue to refuse reasonable cooperation," he added, clearly reading from a script Evelyn had prepared. I nodded politely and maintained perfect composure. "I completely understand your position. You'll have my detailed response within 48 hours. Evelyn seemed genuinely surprised by my sudden agreeableness after weeks of resistance, but she recovered quickly with a satisfied smile. "I'm so glad you're finally beginning to see reason," she said with obvious smugness. "Perhaps you're starting to understand exactly how we handle things here in Green Valley." If only she knew what devastating surprise was coming her way. The very next day, I completed the purchase of Frank's 80 acres of pristine woodland. Amanda had expedited all the final paperwork, and by that afternoon, I held in my hands the official deed to the property that Evelyn had been treating as her personal domain for years without any legal right whatsoever. That night, I could barely contain my excitement, knowing that when Evelyn knocked on my door the following morning with her threatening lawsuit paperwork, I would have in my pocket something that would leave the entire HOA board absolutely stunned and speechless. At precisely 9 o'clock the next morning, right on schedule, like clockwork, my doorbell rang. Evelyn stood on my front porch, immaculately dressed in a navy blue blazer and crisp white pants, her hair styled perfectly despite the light morning drizzle. Marcus Bennett hovered nervously behind her, clutching a leather portfolio that presumably contained their legal threats and intimidation tactics. "Good morning, Mason," Evelyn said with practiced authority. "I assume you've had adequate time to reconsider your position regarding the HOA violation and accumulated fees." Her tone suggested she fully expected complete capitulation and groveling. Her head tilted slightly in that condescending way that had become her infuriating trademark over the years. I smiled broadly and stepped aside to invite them both into my living room. "Actually, I have something extremely important to discuss with both of you. Please, make yourselves comfortable." Confused by my unexpectedly friendly demeanor but unwilling to show any weakness, Evelyn strode in confidently with Marcus trailing nervously behind her. Once they were seated on my couch, she immediately attempted to take control of the conversation. "Before you begin, whatever elaborate explanation you've prepared, I should inform you that we've already filed preliminary paperwork with the county court regarding your multiple violations," she announced with practiced authority. "However, if you're genuinely prepared to pay the full amount today, we can still withdraw the filing before it progresses any further." "That's very interesting," I replied calmly, maintaining perfect composure. "But I think you'll want to examine this first." I slid a thick folder across the coffee table between us. Inside was a complete copy of the deed to Frank Williams' 80 acres, now legally bearing my name as the sole owner, along with a professional survey map clearly showing the exact property boundaries. As of yesterday afternoon, I am the legal owner of the property where this alleged hunting violation occurred. Furthermore, I am also now the sole owner of all the land where the Green Valley HOA has been illegally creating unauthorized trails, installing benches and bird feeders, and planning to build an entire park without the previous owner's knowledge or permission. The color completely drained from Evelyn's face as she snatched up the documents, flipping through them frantically while Marcus peered over her shoulder with growing alarm. His expression shifted rapidly from confusion to horror as the reality of the situation sank in. This can't possibly be right," she stammered, her usual confidence evaporating instantly. "The community has been using those trails for over a decade. We have established legal rights through adverse possession." "Adverse possession," I interrupted calmly, "requires meeting very specific legal criteria that you clearly don't qualify for. You never paid the property taxes, never had explicit or even implicit permission from the legal owner, and Mr. Williams was never properly notified of your intentions to develop his private land." I leaned forward slightly, maintaining steady eye contact. "In fact, I have extensive documentation showing that the HOA deliberately avoided contacting the legal owner while planning substantial development on his property. That raises very serious legal questions about fraud and intentional misrepresentation, especially considering all the fundraising you've conducted for this unauthorized project." Marcus began to look physically ill, tugging anxiously at his shirt collar. "Evelyn, maybe we should consult with our legal counsel immediately before ... double quotes. She silenced him with an icy glare, but her voice had definitely lost its earlier confidence. "This changes absolutely nothing," she insisted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her growing panic. "The community has established clear usage rights through years of maintenance and improvement of those trails. Any court will recognize our legitimate claim. Feel free to pursue that legal argument," I replied with perfect calm. "In the meantime, as the rightful legal owner, I'm formally notifying you that all HOA activities on my private property must cease immediately and permanently. Any trails, benches, bird feeders, or other installations are there without my permission and must be completely removed within 7 days." I slid another official document toward them. "Additionally, this is a cease and desist letter from my attorney regarding the fraudulent park development plans. All fundraising activities and permit applications must be withdrawn immediately, and any money collected under false pretenses must be returned to donors." Evelyn stood abruptly, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "You have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with," she hissed with barely contained rage. "I've built this entire community from nothing. Everyone here respects my vision and leadership. One selfish outsider with a piece of paper won't change decades of established community tradition." I remained seated calmly, maintaining steady eye contact without flinching. "That may very well be true, but the law stands firmly behind me. And unlike HOA rules and regulations, actual property law is enforceable by authorities far beyond your control or influence. After they left, Evelyn storming out in fury, while Marcus practically ran after her. I watched through my front window as they hurried across the street to Jessica Parker's house, no doubt beginning immediate damage control efforts. Within just a few hours, my phone was buzzing constantly with text messages from Sarah, reporting on the neighborhood chaos. Emergency. HOA meeting called for 7 o'clock tonight. Everyone's talking about you buying the hiking land. Evelyn is absolutely furious and making calls to everyone she knows. By mid, I had ordered professional private property, no trespassing signs to be installed around the entire perimeter of my new land, and hired a contractor to begin placing them the following morning. As I prepared to attend the emergency meeting that evening, my doorbell rang again. This time, it was Emily Chen, a sharp 39-year-old reporter from our local newspaper, the Valley Chronicle. Mr. Holloway, I'm Emily Chen from the Valley Chronicle. We've received some very interesting tips about a major dispute between you and the Green Valley HOA. Would you care to provide any comments? Her direct, professional approach was refreshingly honest after months of dealing with passive-aggressive neighborhood politics. I invited her inside and explained the entire situation carefully, making sure to stick to documented facts while avoiding any comments that could be considered defamatory or inflammatory. Emily took detailed notes, her eyes widening in amazement at certain revelations. Say you purchased this land completely legally, and the HOA had been using it without any permission for years, and they were actually planning to build a park named after their president without ever consulting the actual owner. She shook her head in disbelief. This is going to make quite a compelling story for our readers. Just before I left for the evening meeting, an elderly gentleman approached my house cautiously. He introduced himself as Robert Jackson, a 65-year-old retired accountant who had lived in Green Valley for over 20 years. I need to speak with you privately, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder, about Evelyn and that land you just purchased. Inside my living room, Robert revealed that he had served on the HOA board several years ago when they first discovered the land was privately owned by Frank Williams. Evelyn specifically directed us to forget about finding the owner. He confessed with obvious guilt. She said it would unnecessarily complicate things and that adverse possession would eventually take care of the legal issues. I resigned from the board over that exact issue. Told her it wasn't ethical or legal, but she's been running things her way ever since then. Robert also hinted at serious financial irregularities in how the HOA had been handling funds collected for the proposed park development. They've been collecting special assessments from residents for 3 years for something called the Trail Improvement Fund, substantial amounts of money, but the financial reports don't fully account for where all that money actually went. When I asked direct questions at a meeting last year, I was told the detailed accounting was confidential due to ongoing negotiations with contractors. This bombshell information went far beyond simple HOA overreach. What Robert was describing suggested potential embezzlement and financial misconduct at the highest levels. As I thanked him for courageously coming forward, he gripped my arm with genuine concern. Be extremely careful, Mason. Evelyn doesn't handle losing gracefully, and she and her husband have extensive connections throughout this town that could make your life very difficult. The emergency HOA meeting that evening was exactly the chaotic circus I had expected. The community center was packed beyond capacity with residents, many of whom I'd barely exchanged words with during my 2 years in the neighborhood. Evelyn stood at the front of the room, her composure seemingly restored, though a tightness around her eyes betrayed her underlying anger and panic. We've called this special meeting to address a situation that directly affects our entire community, she began with practiced authority. Mr. Holloway has purchased the land adjacent to our neighborhood, land that has served as our beautiful nature trails for over a decade. He is now threatening to cut off all access and destroy years of community improvement work that we've all invested in. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as Evelyn continued her carefully crafted narrative, skillfully painting me as a selfish outsider who didn't understand or care about community values, a greedy individual putting personal interests above the collective good of longtime residents. Marcus stood loyally beside her, nodding earnestly at every single point she made. When she finished her manipulative speech, she turned the floor over to Trevor Adams, her husband, who unveiled glossy professional renderings of the proposed Evelyn Richardson Nature Park, complete with elaborate walking paths, a children's playground, and a small amphitheater for community events and concerts. All of this incredible community asset is now at serious risk, he concluded dramatically. Years of careful planning and fundraising potentially wasted because one person refuses to embrace our shared community vision. When I was finally allowed to speak, the atmosphere in the room was decidedly hostile, with many residents clearly influenced by Evelyn's propaganda campaign. I appreciate everyone's genuine concern, I began, keeping my voice calm and reasonable. But there are some important facts you should all be aware of. First, this land has always been private property owned by someone else. the previous owner was never contacted by the HOA before trails were built or benches installed. Second, the park plans unveiled here tonight were developed without any legal right to the property whatsoever. And third, most importantly, the fundraising conducted for this project was done under completely false pretenses since the HOA never had any legitimate claim to the land. The room immediately erupted in a mixture of outrage and confusion. Some residents shouted questions about their donated money, while others accused me of destroying beloved community amenities for purely selfish reasons. Through the chaos, I noticed Nancy Roberts, the 42-year-old HOA secretary, watching the proceedings with a strange expression, not anger or confusion, but something much closer to fear. She deliberately avoided eye contact when I looked in her direction. Richard Cooper, the treasurer, also appeared deeply uncomfortable, shuffling papers nervously and whispering urgently to Marcus throughout my presentation. After the meeting dissolved into arguing factions and finger-pointing, Sarah approached me as I was preparing to leave. "That was incredibly intense," she whispered. "But you've definitely got people asking serious questions. Some of the older residents are demanding answers about the fundraising. Nobody seems to know exactly how much money was actually collected or where it all went." She glanced around nervously before continuing. "Listen, I think Nancy knows something important. She's been acting really strange ever since this whole park project began ramping up. Maybe you should try talking to her privately." Over the next 3 days, I watched as my new property signs were systematically installed around the perimeter of the 80 acres. By the second day, roughly half of them had been removed or vandalized during the night, exactly as I had anticipated. Fortunately, I'd been prepared for this and had installed motion-activated trail cameras at key strategic points, which captured crystal-clear images of Marcus Bennett and several other HOA board members trespassing on my property to remove the signs. Under cover of darkness, these photographic evidence would prove extremely useful later in legal proceedings. But for now, I was more interested in pursuing the financial angle that Robert had hinted at. Working closely with Amanda Lewis, I filed comprehensive public records requests for all HOA financial documents related to the Nature Park project and trail improvements over the past several years. While waiting for those requests to be processed, I reached out to Nancy Roberts under the pretense of discussing the ongoing sign vandalism issue. She initially refused to meet with me, clearly terrified of potential retaliation, but eventually agreed to a very discreet conversation at a small coffee shop 2 towns away, where she felt safe from Evelyn's extensive network of spies and informants. "I absolutely can't be seen talking to you," she whispered nervously when we finally met. "Evelyn has eyes and ears everywhere in this community. She controls more than you realize." Nancy's revelation was exactly the smoking gun. I needed to expose the full extent of the corruption. As HOA secretary, she had access to all the detailed financial records, including the Special Nature Park Development Fund that had collected over $75,000 from trusting residents over the past 3 years. "The money goes into the fund like it's supposed to," she explained, with obvious guilt. "But then large chunks get transferred out to a consulting company called Green Vision, consulting for things like preliminary design work and environmental assessments. The company submits invoices with extremely vague descriptions and receives payment immediately, approved solely by Evelyn without any normal board review process for major expenditures." Nancy confirmed my worst suspicions. Trevor Adams, Evelyn's husband, and there's another partner, Patricia Bennett, Marcus's sister. It's all kept very quiet and secretive. The contracts were awarded without any competitive bidding process, justified as specialized services that were supposedly exempt from normal procurement policies. Nancy nervously slid a small flash drive across the table to me. "I've been secretly making copies of everything for months." I wanted to speak up earlier, but Evelyn made it crystal clear that my job at the school district could be at serious risk if I caused any problems. Her law firm represents the district, and she's close personal friends with the superintendent. Armed with this devastating evidence, I immediately contacted Detective Alex Morgan, a 40-year-old investigator with the county sheriff's office who specialized in white-collar financial crimes. After carefully reviewing all the documents Nancy had provided, he agreed there were more than sufficient grounds for launching a preliminary investigation into potential embezzlement and misappropriation of community funds. "This isn't just a neighborhood HOA dispute anymore," he explained to me seriously. "If they've been deliberately soliciting donations from residents for a project on land they knew they didn't own, and then systematically diverting those funds to a company owned by board members' family, that crosses several very serious legal lines, including wire fraud and breach of fiduciary duty." While Detective Morgan's investigation began quietly behind the scenes, Evelyn dramatically escalated her personal campaign against me. A small but vocal group of protesters appeared outside my house one morning, carrying professionally made signs reading, "Save our community trails and community values over selfishness." Local social media groups became flooded with posts, questioning my character, my motives, and even my mental stability. More disturbingly, Sarah called to warn me that she'd been approached by her school principal, who expressed serious concerns about her friendship with the controversial new resident and strongly hinted that her upcoming contract renewal might be negatively affected if she continued associating with me. Emily Ch. Comprehensive article about our dispute appeared in the Valley Chronicle, presenting what I felt was a relatively balanced view of the complex situation while raising several pointed questions about the park fundraising and the HOA's legal authority to control private property. The day after the article was published, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney, threatening to sue me for defamation and demanding $100,000 in damages for allegedly harming the reputation of the Green Valley Estates Association and its dedicated officers. The letter specifically mentioned the financial allegations, claiming they were malicious fabrications intentionally designed to distract from Mr. Holloway's own serious violations of community standards and values. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Detective Morgan with a significant update. We've obtained preliminary bank records through legal subpoenas, he said without any preamble. Over the past 3 years, Green Vision Consulting has received payments totaling $68,000 directly from the HOA's Special Development Fund. The company appears to have only one client, your HOA, and has consistently issued invoices for services that industry standards suggest would typically cost about 1/3 of what was actually charged. We're definitely moving forward with a full investigation, but I thought you should know we're taking this very seriously. At the next regular HOA meeting, Evelyn appeared visibly tense but was still doubling down aggressively on her established narrative. We absolutely will not be intimidated by completely baseless accusations and personal attacks, she declared dramatically to the assembled residents. Mr. Holloway is desperately attempting to deflect attention from his own serious violations by viciously smearing the reputation of those who have selflessly served this community for years. Rest assured, the board will defend itself vigorously against these malicious attacks. As she spoke with increasing desperation, I noticed several longtime residents exchanging skeptical glances and whispering among themselves. The carefully constructed facade was definitely beginning to show serious cracks. Evelyn must have sensed the shifting mood in the room because she abruptly changed tactics, fixing me with her coldest, most threatening stare from across the packed room. You've made a very serious mistake, Mason. When this is all over, I promise you won't just lose this particular battle. You'll genuinely regret ever moving to Green Valley. I will personally make absolutely sure of it. Her public threat, made in front of dozens of witnesses, was exactly the final piece of evidence I needed. As I left that contentious meeting, I knew it was definitely time to stop playing defense and launch my own devastating counterattack. What Evelyn didn't realize was that in less than 24 hours, it wouldn't be me facing life-changing consequences. It would be her entire corrupt empire crashing down. The next morning, I called Emily Chen and invited her to my home for an exclusive in-depth interview. When she arrived with her recording equipment, I presented her with copies of all the damaging evidence I'd systematically gathered over the past several weeks. The detailed financial records showing suspicious payments to Green Vision Consulting. The incorporation documents clearly showing the company's ownership by Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett. The misleading fundraising materials that deliberately misrepresented the HOA's legal right to develop Frank's private property, and sworn statements from both Frank Williams and Robert Jackson confirming that the HOA had intentionally avoided contacting the actual landowner. I also provided her with the crystal clear audio recording of Evelyn's threatening statement from the previous night's meeting, along with written witness statements from several residents who had heard her make the threat. This is incredibly extensive documentation, Emily said with obvious amazement as she reviewed everything. And you're telling me Detective Morgan is already conducting an active investigation? I nodded confidently. He's been extremely professional throughout this process, treating this as a legitimate financial crimes case rather than just a neighborhood dispute. I believe he's scheduled to interview other board members and potential witnesses today. Emily's comprehensive follow-up article would appear in the next day's printed paper, but she promised to publish an online preview that very evening, perfect timing for the special emergency HOA meeting that Evelyn had frantically called to discuss legal strategies against continued defamatory statements and malicious attacks. While Emily worked on crafting her bombshell story, I implemented the next crucial phase of my carefully planned counterattack. Working closely with Amanda Lewis, I drafted a detailed formal letter to every single Green Valley resident, providing clear documentation of the financial irregularities and explaining exactly how their generous donations had been misused for personal gain. I included copies of the trail camera photographs showing HOA board members illegally vandalizing my private property signs in the middle of the night, along with a comprehensive accounting of how much money had been collected for the park development fund versus how much had actually been paid to the Adams family's consulting company for questionable services. The letter concluded, with a reasonable proposal that I hoped would demonstrate my good faith. I would voluntarily establish a legitimate community trail system on a carefully selected portion of my new land, properly maintained, properly insured, and with appropriate legal protections if the current corrupt HOA leadership resigned immediately and transparent financial controls were implemented to prevent future abuse. By late afternoon, word had spread rapidly throughout the neighborhood that Detective Morgan had been seen at the homes of both Richard Cooper and Nancy Roberts, presumably taking official statements as part of his expanding investigation. Several residents reported receiving increasingly frantic phone calls from Evelyn, desperately urging them to attend that evening's emergency meeting to show solidarity against these baseless attacks on our dedicated community leadership. But her support base was crumbling rapidly as more residents learned the truth. John Peterson, a 70-year-old retired banker who had personally donated $5,000 to the Park Development Fund, was actively calling other residents and expressing his outrage at how their money had been secretly mishandled. Cynthia Miller, one of Evelyn's former allies on the HOA board, publicly announced she was demanding a complete professional audit of all association funds and financial records. The special emergency meeting that evening was unlike anything in Green Valley's history. The community center was packed far beyond its normal capacity, with angry residents spilling out into the parking lot. Evelyn arrived with both Trevor and Marcus, all three looking tense but still determined to maintain control through sheer force of will. She attempted to call the meeting to order with her usual commanding presence, but was immediately interrupted by shouting and hostile questions from the crowd. "Is it actually true that you've been funneling HOA money directly to your husband's company?" Someone called out angrily. "Why didn't you tell us the land wasn't legally ours to develop?" demanded another resident. Evelyn tried desperately to regain control, her voice rising above the growing chaos. "These are all malicious fabrications and lies. Mason Holloway is attempting to manipulate and divide this community for his own selfish purposes. Yes, Green Vision Consulting has provided valuable professional services to the HOA, all properly documented and approved by the board. The fact that Trevor happens to be a principal in the company doesn't change the quality of work provided or create any conflict of interest." This explanation only prompted more angry questions and loud objections from the crowd. "But you didn't disclose the obvious conflict of interest to the residents who were paying for it," shouted Richard Cooper, shocking everyone by suddenly breaking ranks with Evelyn. "I signed off on those payments because you personally assured me everything was completely above board and transparent." As the meeting descended into complete chaos with multiple conversations happening simultaneously, District Attorney William Hayes unexpectedly arrived, accompanied by Detective Morgan and another investigator. They stood quietly at the back of the room, observing the proceedings with professional interest. Their official presence definitely did not go unnoticed by Evelyn, whose carefully maintained composure finally cracked under the pressure. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she shouted, slamming her hand hard on the podium. "Everything I've done has been for this community and its residents. If I've had to bend a few minor procedural rules, it was only to ensure our beautiful park would become a reality for everyone to enjoy. Would you rather have some gun-toting outsider control our access to nature forever?" Her desperate outburst created a moment of stunned silence in the packed room. But then Nancy Roberts slowly stood up from her seat in the corner. "That's not true, Evelyn, and you know it," she said, her voice trembling with fear but filled with determination. "You deliberately concealed crucial information about the land ownership from all of us. You pressured the entire board to approve payments to Trevor's company without proper review or oversight. You personally threatened my job when I questioned some of the invoices. This was never about the community or building something beautiful. It was about building a monument to yourself with other people's hard-earned money." The meeting erupted again with multiple residents simultaneously demanding Evelyn's immediate resignation. Marcus attempted to defend her with weak talking points, but his heart clearly wasn't in it anymore. Trevor remained completely silent throughout the chaos, his face pale as he watched his wife's carefully constructed empire crumbling in real time. District Attorney Hayes approached the podium and gently but firmly asked Evelyn to step aside. "In light of our ongoing investigation," he announced to the packed room, "I would strongly suggest the association consider implementing temporary leadership until this serious matter is completely resolved." Even faced with this official pressure, Evelyn refused to surrender gracefully. "I absolutely will not be stepping down," she declared, glaring defiantly at the hostile crowd. "These accusations are completely defamatory, and anyone repeating them will be named in our comprehensive lawsuit. This community needs strong, experienced leadership now more than ever, and I will not abandon my responsibilities because of one disgruntled resident's personal vendetta against me." With that final defiant statement, she gathered her things and stormed out of the meeting, with Trevor and Marcus hurrying nervously after her. As the residents slowly dispersed, many approached me with questions, sincere apologies, and expressions of support for my position. Sarah, who had been discreetly documenting the entire meeting with her phone, gave me an encouraging thumbs up from across the room. Emily Chen, who had slipped into the meeting during the height of the commotion, was busily interviewing multiple residents for her follow-up story. District Attorney Hayes and Detective Morgan asked if I could come to the sheriff's office the next morning to provide a comprehensive official statement. This situation has moved far beyond a simple HOA dispute, Hayes explained quietly. The evidence suggests potential wire fraud, systematic misappropriation of funds, and serious abuse of position. We're taking it extremely seriously. That night, I received a mysterious text message from an unknown number. Storage unit at Valley Self-Storage. Unit 23. Getting emptied tonight. Important documents being moved. Thought you should know. I immediately called Detective Morgan, who thanked me for the valuable tip and promised to look into it right away. The next morning, I learned that officers had successfully intercepted Trevor Adams and Patricia Bennett in the middle of removing boxes of financial records from the storage unit. Desperate last-ditch attempt to destroy evidence. That only served to strengthen the criminal case against them. Evelyn might have threatened to ruin my life completely, but it was her own life that was now falling apart, and entirely because of her own illegal choices and abuse of power. But she still had one final desperate move left to play, and I needed to be completely ready for it. 2 days later, Evelyn made her last pathetic attempt to maintain control. Through social media posts and massed emails to residents, she announced a community trail preservation walk, basically organizing a mass trespassing event on my private property, scheduled for Saturday morning. Join your neighbors in reclaiming our beloved community trails. Her message read, bring children, grandparents, and cameras. Show Mason Holloway he cannot steal what rightfully belongs to all of us. It was a transparently obvious publicity stunt designed to paint me as the villain, one selfish man, blocking innocent families from enjoying their traditional outdoor space. I had seen this desperate move coming from miles away and was completely prepared. First, I immediately alerted Detective Morgan and the sheriff's office about the planned mass trespassing event. Then, working closely with Amanda Lewis, I had legally designated most of my land as a private wildlife conservation reserve, complete with official permits and substantial tax benefits. I had a sturdy security fence installed with clear, professional signage showing the property's official conservation status and the serious legal penalties for trespassing on protected wildlife habitat. I also constructed a proper legal entry gate with an informational kiosk detailing the property's environmental designation and conservation purposes. Saturday morning arrived, and I positioned myself at the main gate with a video camera. With Amanda standing beside me as my legal representative, Evelyn showed up right on schedule, dramatically leading a group of about 30 people and waving signs, reading Trails for All and Community Over Greed. She was wearing brand new, obviously expensive hiking gear and carrying a walking stick that she had clearly never used before in her life. She hesitated noticeably when she saw the professional fencing and official conservation signs, but quickly put on a defiant show for her followers and the cameras. This is absolutely outrageous, she declared loudly for everyone to hear. We've used these beautiful trails for decades. These illegal fences are a violation of our community rights, and we're here to take back what belongs to all of us. She moved confidently toward the gate, but before she could even touch it, 3 patrol cars rolled up and parked nearby. Several deputies stepped out, led by Detective Morgan himself. Good morning, everyone, Morgan announced to the assembled group. This land is legally designated private property and a protected wildlife conservation area. The owner has reported previous incidents of trespassing and vandalism. Anyone crossing this boundary line can and will be arrested for criminal trespassing. He looked directly at Evelyn with professional authority. Mrs. Richardson, organizing this mass trespassing event may be used as additional evidence in your ongoing criminal case. I strongly advise you to reconsider your actions here today. Evelyn's face turned bright red with rage and embarrassment. This is completely absurd. Tell them, Marcus. But Marcus had already backed away from her, clearly unwilling to risk a confrontation with law enforcement officers. Other participants quickly followed his example, heading back to their cars as the very real threat of arrest completely deflated Evelyn's rebellious crowd. You're all giving up so easily, she cried desperately. After everything I've done for this community over the years. That particular phrase, everything I've done, sounded very different. Now that everyone knew the truth about her illegal activities, her crowd rapidly dwindled to just a few diehard supporters who also departed after continued firm but polite pressure from the deputies. As she finally walked back to her car, in defeat, Evelyn shot me one last hateful glare. This definitely isn't over, she hissed with pure venom, but her threat rang completely empty now. Stripped of all power and influence. The following week brought a flood of major developments as investigators processed evidence provided by Nancy Roberts, Richard Cooper, and the financial files recovered from the storage unit. The district attorney formally charged Evelyn, Trevor, and Patricia with multiple felonies, including fraud, embezzlement, and systematic misuse of HOA funds. Over $68,000 had been illegally diverted from community funds to pay for personal vacations, home renovations, and luxury purchases. The HOA board was completely disbanded by emergency vote of the residents. Sarah Johnson was elected as interim president by overwhelming margin. Her first official action was ordering a comprehensive professional audit of all association finances and implementing strict new rules for financial transparency and accountability. The remaining board members publicly apologized to me and the entire community for allowing Evelyn's corruption to continue unchecked for so long. Richard Cooper resigned from his treasurer position in shame, admitting he had never properly verified Evelyn's financial directives or questioned the suspicious payments to her family's company. Meanwhile, I kept my word to the community. I worked with professional trail designers to build a legitimate public trail system on a carefully selected portion of my land. Complete with proper permits, environmental impact study, and comprehensive planning, I named it the Frank Williams Memorial Trail. In honor of the original owner who had been so generous with his permission, a beautiful bronze plaque told his story and reminded all visitors to respect both nature and property ownership rights. Evelyn and her co-conspirators ultimately accepted plea deals to avoid the embarrassment and expense of a public trial. Each received probation, suspended jail sentences, and were ordered to pay back over $100,000 in restitution to the community. They were also permanently banned from serving in any management capacity for nonprofits or HOA organizations for 10 years. Within a month of their sentencing, they quietly sold their house and left Green Valley permanently, their reputations completely destroyed. The last HOA meeting I attended under Sarah's leadership felt completely different from Evelyn's authoritarian regime. The focus was genuinely on building community rather than power games and personal advancement. When we voted on the new access agreement for my conservation trail, including proper insurance coverage and environmental protection guidelines, it passed unanimously without a single objection. Is what real community cooperation looks like, Sarah said with a genuine smile. Working together instead of fighting each other. Walking home that evening, I reflected on everything that had happened. I still hunt peacefully on my land, now with full support and understanding from my neighbors. The HOA still exists, but it actually works for the people instead of against them. And the $75,000 that Evelyn was ordered to pay back in restitution. At my suggestion, the community voted to establish it as an annual scholarship fund for local students studying ethics, leadership, and public service. Sometimes losing something you thought you had shows you what's really worth. Having the HOA lost their illegal access to someone else's property and found honesty and transparency instead. I gained something far more valuable than just land ownership. I gained a genuine community of neighbors who respect each other. And Evelyn, last I heard, she's living in a small apartment in another state with absolutely no HOA rules at all. Somehow, that seems perfectly fitting.